Now we can hear me. Hello, good evening. Welcome to another edition of BMA Violet Hour. My name is Tracy Beal. I'm the manager of public programs here at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Tonight's program is called Lasting Legacies, and it is inspired by the exhibition All Due Respect, which is currently on view at the Baltimore Museum of Art until Sunday, April the 3rd on 2022. So tonight, well, the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna jump right in and introduce our moderator. So moderating tonight's talk is Dr. Leslie King-Hammond. She is Professor Emerita at the Maryland Institute College of Art, where she was also the former graduate dean and the founding director of the Center for Race and Culture at the Maryland Institute College of Art. So let's bring on Dr. Leslie King-Hammond.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So happy to be here and really excited to have this conversation with these amazing artists. Before we really get started, I would like to introduce Leela Grothy, who is the curator who put this exhibition together. So she can give you a little bit of an insight for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition, and for those of you who will be inspired to go see it, so that you will have a point of reference for the exhibition. Leila, take it away.
Thanks, Leslie. Okay, so to introduce these incredible artists, I'll give an utterly brief introduction to what they've brought to the museum. Here's the slideshow. So here we have painter and installation artist Lauren Francis Adams, who presents an installation of new work made in response to objects from the BMA's permanent collection, objects made roughly between 1800 and 1850. To address the contentious histories and ongoing legacies embedded in these objects and in the places that house them, Adams transforms, fragments, and recombines elements from these historic objects, incorporating the significance of form and material to address the power of display and the ways in which institutions can replicate white supremacy through presentation and preservation. Next, we have painter Mequitta Ahuja, who experiments with a new painting technique created during the final months of her mother's life. Woo! Ahuja uses the medium of oil paint sculpturally, working through a quick and intuitive process to apply a thick monochromatic coat of paint, which she then carves, pushes, and scrapes off the surface, using loss and removal to depict images of herself and her mother together. Here, in her largest work to date, painter and printmaker LaToya M. Hobbs presents Carving Out Time, an artwork inspired by her own experience with motherhood. This piece chronicles 5 scenes from an ordinary day of an artist mother across 15 larger-than-life scaled wood panels. Hobbs transforms the woodblock print matrix into a painting surface, carving into the wood and activating the panels as printmaking blocks to then later present them as paintings in the museum. And finally, interdisciplinary artist Cindy Cheng investigates the theories of far right-wing conspiracists to further her exploration of otherness and systems of belief and belonging. Utilizing the furnishings of a TV interview setup, Chang questions the veracity of information we use to determine us from them. With projected animations and sculptural installation, Chang references the misplaced locus of morality in an episode of an evangelical Christian TV program, warning its audiences about the evils of Scooby-Doo. Chang uses concealment and isolation as a metaphor for her project. So join me now in welcoming Dr. Leslie King-Hammond and these 4 wonderful artists.
Thank you so much, Layla. Let me just give a word to the audience. Before we go into this conversation, which will surprisingly go very fast, I would like you all, everyone listening, who has any interest or questions, to look towards the chat box and put your questions there so that we can keep this flowing as a conversation as we open it up to you all who are looking on, wondering what these artists have to say. So, having worked with artists nearly my whole life at MICA and beyond, process is something that is very, very important to artists, and the mediums in which they choose to work generally dictate the directions and the passions for which will become the manifestation of their personal, professional, and lasting legacy voice. What do we mean by lasting legacy? Well, basically, we're talking about impact. Impact. What will become of this work in the larger world? So, my first question to the artist, so that you, the audience, have an idea about the kind of work and labor that goes into the creative process, is what is the nature of the inspiration and the mediums that you have chosen to create your imagery? What are those challenges that you feel are important in the process of creating your legacy and your personal imagery, your personal aesthetic?
So I'll give a response to that question first. So as Leela mentioned, my practice is as a painter and printmaker. Within my painting practice, I work pretty traditionally, oil on canvas. Well, not canvas as much, but oil on canvas, acrylic on canvas, and also on wood panel. With my printmaking practice, I primarily specialize in relief printmaking. So that entails wood cut, linoleum cut, and also monotype. We kind of talked about what some of the difficulties could be within that practice. I feel like painting is something that I feel like anybody can do anywhere. So I tend to focus my attention a little bit more toward printmaking, at least in graduate school. Some challenges for that medium could be access to a printing press, which is why I like relief, is because it's a process you can do at home. So I literally just have like wooden spoons and rollers that if I'm printing something small, I print it here right on my table in my studio. So I like relief because you can do it anywhere. You don't have to have special chemicals or like studio access to have access to that process. And then in terms of like how the mediums relate to my legacy, yeah, I feel like as a printmaker, I really wasn't aware of a lot of particular like Black women printmakers. In particular, I pretty much learned about Elizabeth Catlett in school, and that was it. But as I've kind of grown in my practice and become connected with other artists, starting to learn about more people. So I feel like I want my legacy as a printmaker to be kind of etched that there are, women doing Black women doing printmaking. So yeah, that's kind of how the legacy part plays a role in my work.
Great. Cindy?
So like Leela said, I'm an interdisciplinary artist. So I really like to play across media. And I'm really drawn, I think, primarily to tactility. So I'm really kind of, materials driven. And I enjoy problem solving, and I also am really attracted to the unknown. So I'm attracted to, novel materials and approaches, and I'm constantly looking for opportunities to learn new techniques. Actually, currently I'm taking a class at the Baltimore Jewelry Center, learning how to use metals on a small scale. I'm learning some fibers techniques currently as well. So even alongside sort of larger projects like the body of work at the BMA, I think it's really important for me to always have kind of like a process of learning and engaging with new materials informing my studio. And I think that really sets the stage for playfulness within that creative space, which is something that is incredibly important for me. And I think that does sort of like link up to legacy, because when I think of legacy as an artist, something that comes to mind is having a sustainable practice that can kind of go the distance. So I think, having this love for learning and being able to integrate that into my creative processes, I think helps me build that type of a sustainable practice.
Mm-hmm. 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 Lauren?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm a painter in the studio. That's home base. That's where I start from. The installations that I make that are wallpapers or previously what might have been murals, hand-painted murals, those come out of my painting practice in the studio, where I kind of problem solve all the images that I'm trying to work with and the ways that material might behave. I work a lot with artifacts and art history. So fiber or woven structures show up a lot in my painted works. So figuring out how to do that in paint, then I extrapolate that to, you know, large scale digital wallpaper, or like I said, hand painted murals. And that ephemerality, like where something's painted over after an installation comes down or thrown away, like in the case of wallpaper, is really a challenge for my understanding of legacy, because preservation isn't necessarily part of the equation when we're talking about something that's meant to be on display for, you know, long time in terms of art, like a few months, but a short time in terms of, you know, it's not collected or preserved in the kind of classic way that we often think of art. And yeah.
Good. Makita?
I think I'm most excited when I'm within the creative process. And that's not limited to painting for me. I could be choosing family photos to hang on my wall or trying to perfect a cookie recipe. The creative process starts with something known, like I'm going to make a rollout cookie that I can do with my son, or I'm going to make a painting that tells the story of my recent body of work. Once I start engaging with the stuff, the butter and the sugar, or the photos and the frames, or the image and the paint, I hit a twofold problem. First is always some kind of a limitation. It can be a self-imposed limitation, or it can be inherent to a circumstance. And then second is the flip side, which is endless possibilities. In the creative process, these two characteristics are in energetic tension with each other. I wanted recently to strip things down in my work, so I decided that I was going to make a black and white painting. But the minute I got to my materials, this twofold problem showed up. I don't actually own any black paint. In the reality of how I work, a black and white painting really is a value scale of mixed gray. And so right then, that limitation, you know, black and white, hits up against endless possibility. As I'm working, I'm discovering the billion ways to mix gray, the infinite temperatures of gray, and a multitude of subtle chromatic shifts. And I think the final result does appear more simplified, but to get there, I have to manage my gray color spectrum just as I would any other chosen color palette. So for me, it's, you know, those moments of discovery or opportunities for creative expansion that happen when I follow the creative process that keep me, you know, engaged as a person and as an artist. In terms of legacy, I think that you have to challenge something of existing norms or, you know, values or consensus thinking. And I purposely align myself with things that are uncool. So like I cite Poussin's self-portrait at the Louvre as a central inspiration for my work. He made it in 1650. And I think it's just about the least cool painting you could think of. It's of central importance to me because in it, Poussin presents an alternative to our contemporary ideas of self-portraiture. So Poussin presents self-portraiture as a discourse on representation. And in the contemporary context, as women and as people of color, we're expected to mine our personal experiences as case study to our social condition. And that's the lens through which our self-portraits are viewed. And I'm interested in those ideas too. I'm also invested in those ideas, but that's not all I have to offer. That's not the limit of my expertise. I can also talk and paint authoritatively about art like Poussin did. So in my work, I do both. I tell my own story and I tell the story of painting. And that's really what I want my legacy to be.
You know, I had another question, but you all have each responded quite eloquently to the question of how the materials that you choose correspond to the legacy that you're trying to create. So, what I would really like to know now as we move on, what do you consider to be kind of like the defining essential elements to creating a lasting legacy? What comprises? Do you understand? Yes, you created a body of work, but what other dynamics or elements or identifiers do you think that are important to create your presence beyond a time when perhaps you're not even here anymore? No one here is here anymore. But where will you hope to see your work land in history?
I
Come
would
on.
say a lot of that really depends on people like you, Dr. Leslie King-Hammond. I feel like the art historians, the
Yeah.
curators,
Mm-hmm.
the art education people, the art historians, they are so important to, establishing an artist's
Mm-hmm.
legacy, in particular being a part of the canon, I would say. Yeah, because, we don't know about artists if nobody teaches us about them. So I would
Mm-hmm.
say having people write about our work, having critical discourse about the work, I
Mm-hmm.
think is so important, because you can do the most amazing paintings, but if nobody's talking about them, I mean, how
Mm-hmm.
are people gonna know about them? And so that's something that I am personally striving for with my art practice
Mm-hmm.
now, is getting more art historians to talk about the pieces, getting more literature about the pieces. So I think that's really something that is important in cementing yourself in the art canon, which in turn helps like cement your legacy as an artist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you feel is the importance of the artist's voice right now? Okay, I'm an older art historian, and I thought that, when I went into so-called retirement, that I would sort of slack off. I'm finding that my work is growing exponentially. But as it grows, I am becoming extremely hypersensitive to the fact that too often artists, art historians, and critics end up being the voice of the artist. And I'm now wanting to flip the script. And so I want to know if I'm on the right track by saying that I want to hear the artist's voice. I want to interview, as we are having this conversation, which I'm sure will be played out again. How important is your voice? It's fine to have the art critic, the art historian, the scholars, but how important is your voice?
I think it's extremely important. When I kind of talk about the experience of interacting with art, I think about it as a triangle.
Mm-hmm.
So I have me at the artist at the top, the
Mm-hmm.
person experiencing the art, the viewer. And then for me, because I am an artist who does primarily figurative work, exploring portraiture, depicting images of Black women predominantly, I have the person who's in the work
Mm-hmm.
as the other part of the triangle. So I think so many times, and I can speak from, what I've researched
Mm-hmm.
about figuration and images, particularly of people of color, there's always some other type of commentary or some other voice that is defining for us who we are. But I think it's so important for me to change that narrative. And so now I'm not only like expressing what I feel about the people in my community, but giving them an opportunity to express how they feel about themselves. So I really see it as a collaborative process, the act of me creating images of people that I have in my circle. So I would say the artist voice is definitely important, particularly when you get into the museum space, like just kind of something as practical as reading like the information about an artwork. So I think a lot of times, if you're not really intimate with the artist, or if you're not concerned about the artist telling you what their work is about, and rather like putting your own interjections, there could be a lot of like misinformation sometimes. So I think it's really important to center the artist's voice and how they are talking about their work. Now, I think it's also important for artists to listen to what people are saying about their work. That way they can have context, or maybe they can have, kind of avenues of thinking that they probably were not considering before. But I think the artist should still be able to respond and for us to tell you what our work is about, and then kind of take those outside voices into consideration, or maybe change things that we feel are relevant or that are applicable. But I think the artist's voice should still be centered.
Makita, you've been very eloquent in talking about your work. How is it that you think your voice in tandem with your work will resonate within a lasting legacy?
Well, I think we only have control up to a point, and then we pass the baton on. So, I think one tries in their lifetime to frame their work, but ultimately it's going to, last longer than we do. And it's going to be for the culture to determine its, lasting meaning with, with the hope that it has a lasting meaning for the culture.
Lauren, what do you think?
Sure. I appreciate what Makita just said about, and I think LaToya, this resonates with what you were saying about listening and the ways in which we can also listen to responses to the work. We're in the business of communication, visual communication, and what Makita just said about that being carried forward, and that interpretation may change over time. It may not even be the same interpretation in the moment with a group of people in the same room. I think about how long it takes to learn what I think I'm put here to learn, and how short life is. And I think about, the ars longa vita brevis aspect of learning the skills and craft of what we do as artists. And I wonder about the longevity past my lifetime. I'm concerned with sticking around here long enough to get out what I need to get out and develop what I need to develop. And I think also there's, I do so much work with history, and, Lila mentioned this with the project at the museum is about the harmful legacies that have been instituted and have created, created exclusion, created silences that, to me, animate my concerns as an artist, and particularly with the ways in which, well, let me try to reframe that. So making work in a way that grapples with those things puts me in a place of an interesting kind of conundrum when I think about legacies, because I also think monuments and the culture of monumentality has done quite a number on how we think about what legacies mean and what's important, and how interdependence functions actually to create something quite meaningful that is not always captured in the preserved collections and in the monuments.
Cindy, what do you think about your impact?
Well, I think just considering my current sort of line of research around conspiracy theories and conspiratorial thinking and the impact that that's had on our communities, like right now, which has just been, it's negative, there's no other way to spin it. So I think I also have this kind of like complicated relationship to the idea of legacy to a certain degree, but I think that just thinking about maybe my work and the relationship it can have to this idea, like I want to sort of like create projects that can have kind of like a positive impact in the communities and on the context sort of in which it lives, so like I think that that's kind of how I'm navigating making work about these kind of like rather depressing situations and topics based around exclusionary belief systems and questionable like morality systems as well, so I think that that's kind of how I look at it. I also like to be totally honest, when I'm in the studio, I'm not necessarily thinking about legacy. This is not really something that like comes to my mind that much when I'm in the studio. I'm just making work, and I'm thinking about topics that are interesting to me and, acting in a way that's dynamic and responsive. So a lot of this is kind of like comes after bodies of work have been created, and you've kind of moved on to a different phase. So I just want to sort of like point that out as well.
No, those are, each one of you have made some very, very valid points. But we also know that in our world, in the time in which we're living and for which we have been living in this kind of era of absence of sustained patronage for the work of the artist, okay, what in your careers thus far, as young as your careers are, what resources, grants, acknowledgments to your efforts have been particularly impactful to your studio practice?
I'll start. For me, having role models of the professional side has benefited me. And I cite my parents in that. When I was growing up, my parents kind of didn't really have jobs. They did independent work. Neither of my parents were in the field of art. My mother was an independent contractor for nonprofit organizations, and my father is a stock market analyst. But seeing how they organized their time and space and income was an important model for me as a work from home, self-employed artist. And most importantly, seeing how they worked allowed me to understand that I didn't necessarily need to have a job, but that I could put together my own professional income generating life that aligns with my creative and my financial needs. I know that's coming from a bit of a different angle than kind of grants and those kinds of things.
No, any angle is absolutely on point if it allowed you and gave you the infrastructure upon which to build a solid studio practice. All right.
Right.
Now, what are some of the other experiences that you all have had? Because I know you didn't do it independently. Manna didn't fall from the heavens.
Well, kind of to play off what Makita was saying about, having amazing role models. I think that, having just a community that you can engage with, rely on, other people like creative makers, whatever form that takes, I think is incredibly important because like it's really difficult to have a vibrant ongoing studio practice. Like it takes a lot of work, and it does require some sacrifices, so to have other people around you who motivate you, who you can talk to and throw ideas around with, and can support you when things aren't going great, I think that's really vital for any maker.
Yeah, I'll continue with that sentiment. So I'm thinking about it in a few different ways, kind of playing off what Makita and Cindy said. I think my family has been really instrumental, particularly my partner. I've never felt like I had to choose between wanting to be an artist and being a mother, and also like whatever. I felt like it was never something that I felt like I had to give up, particularly thinking about my role as a mother. So I feel like a lot of times when women do step into motherhood, we're the ones expected to give up something in order to fulfill that role of being a mother. So I'm just really thankful that my partner is an artist, so he understands and is really supportive. Yeah, so I've never felt like I've had to give up any part of myself for for something else. Then I think in terms of like more practical things, in terms of what we think about support for what artists need, I would say some of the first instances are like curators who took a chance on me and my work. So, I think the first solo show I had here in Baltimore was like in 2018, 2018, I believe. Sheena Morrison invited me to do a show at Goucher College. And then from that show, Kirk Shannon Butt saw my work and wanted to give me a solo show at City Hall. And this kind of sparked this kind of domino effect. Because I really felt like people didn't know me, my work, me as an artist. People know me as a professor at MICA, but I really wasn't showing that much actually like in Baltimore City. So those are some key things for me that kind of set the ball rolling. And then, you know, obviously I won the Sondheim for 2020. That was really nice. The recognition was nice, but also the funding helped me to like extend my studio rent so I could finish carving out time during the time that it was allotted. Other grants, you know, like the travel grant. So yeah, I'm being aware of those things, resources, and curators taking a chance on me are some things that were personally helpful. And then, you know, we can't forget about collectors who are really important to sustaining an artist's practice.
Right. Lauren.
Sure. I just love hearing all these beautiful personal, you know, Makita team, Cindy team, LaToya team, the community that supports us, and that professional bit too with curators. LaToya, thank you for mentioning that. I want to just also kind of put a plug in for residencies. I've been able to go to maybe like over a dozen residencies in my lifetime, and be it a place in my own city where I've got a free studio and, you know, an audience and a network, to being able to travel to places like Rotterdam or in Brazil or throughout the United States. Residencies have been a support structure of studio space, and folks that are at those residencies, from the administrative team to the other artists in residence, and then the connections that those residencies have afforded me to do some research in places that otherwise I just wouldn't have had the you know, kind of entry ticket to meet folks. And I've just have wrapped up a residency in Delaware at the Winterthur Museum, and that really supported me as I was working on Maryland historic furniture and album quilts as a maker creator fellow. And I would just love to see more of that kind of thing being offered, with the concept of putting artists in places that artists aren't normally invited, and giving us resources, time and space, and introductions. Like how amazing it is what artists can do when you invite us in the room.
This is absolutely paramount to having a vibrant, viable career. Tell me, what do you feel are some of the other resources that could be developed in this region, in this city, to support artists? I think that this is a really, really, you all have been blessed. Layla somehow looked out into the universe and found you as a collective to present. How important is this opportunity for you to have your work in an exhibition for a sustained period of time, all right? And at the same time, what other things do you think could be happening to encourage other artists to find ways to have their work presented?
I just want to say off the bat that it really is a dream come true to be to have my work at the BMA, to be amongst this incredible group of artists. I think for me, I really felt like I had a hard time establishing a presence in Baltimore, and I felt very isolated there. I think the community in Baltimore is so much focused around MICA and Johns Hopkins, and I wasn't particularly connected to either one. I came in, I was connected to MICA, but then it was just a 1-year thing. And so, it's taken me a long time to find my footing in that community. And this really feels like a kind of, just crowning moment within that process. So it really a dream come true.
Well, we have to give a lot of credit to the BMA in terms of the initiatives that they have created under the leadership of Chris Bedford. all right, who really did stand up and say that it's time to give fuller recognition to those constituencies who have not traditionally had a presence at the BMA. So, what other opportunities do you feel could exist or be developed for artists that would be so meaningful? Makita, you hit on a very important point about your reception in this city, in this region, and the difficulty of transcending it. So, yes, of course, this BMA exhibition is a godsend. It's a blessing. But there, you all are very adept at being aware of your creative community and the geography and landscape of where you live. So, just brainstorm, throw some things out, because you don't know who's out there listening and who needs to have this information. You have nothing to lose. You're already on exhibit at the BMA. You've arrived.
I want to chime in. So I too am very happy to be in this exhibition. That was one of my goals is when I moved here. I moved here in 2013 to start teaching at MICA. And so I was like, I want to be in be in their collection or have an exhibition at the BMA. So really thankful for that. I would say some things that I feel like could be really helpful to artists. And again, I'm speaking from my role as an artist who is a mother, more residency experiences where children and families are welcome, but then there's also support for you when you get there. So a lot of residencies, sometimes I get it, but then it is either at a certain time of year that's inconvenient, or I have to choose between I can't go because I need to bring my children with me. If my husband has another opportunity or something like that, we kind of have to choose who can do what. There has to be somebody to keep the kids. So having more residencies that are family friendly, but when the artists come there, having support, so I don't have to split my studio time between watching my kids and being in the studio. So I think that's something that could be, I think not just Baltimore, but in general,
right?
Because I think if you haven't done a residency, it is so important. I think an artist should be able to have a residency at least once every year, whether that's their own organized residency where you just say, hey, I'm going here for a week to focus on nothing but my work, or if it's a residency that you apply for and are awarded. Other things that I feel like could be reevaluated is some of the kind of gatekeeper-ish things that kind of become associated with art. So sometimes having to have so many references who are art administrators. If you're just starting out, you don't know those type of people yet because you haven't been able to make those type of connections or reference letters from certain people. You kind of feel I'm not going to get this because I don't have references of people that are a certain stature. So just thinking about things like that, or even when it comes to the application process, making things a little bit more clear and daunting, so you're not having to guess what do they mean by this. So kind of getting rid of some of the barriers that can intimidate people from even wanting to try to apply for certain things.
Right.
Can I just second that? Because applications take a lot of time, and if you're doing it right, it just becomes such a lengthy process of editing and getting all your stuff exactly how it's described, and often multi-page PDFs, and just following all the rules is a barrier itself. So I really appreciate you speaking to that, LaToya. I also appreciate, I hope the BMA continues to do this, because one and done is not going to cut it. The lasting legacy means the institution makes a commitment for the long term. And I also really appreciate personally, I'm very grateful in the city of Baltimore that, I keep showing up and people, are sticking with me. And this really helps me perfect and refine and move towards those goals that I'm interested in long term, that I may not always get, sure footing on the first try with. And then I would also say, I'm sitting in my studio in Greenmount West. I will not be here long term. Affordable studio space is a real concern, especially in a hyper developing, city like Baltimore, around Penn Station in particular. There are people who have put real work into places like Area 405. Stuart Watson is one of them. This building was just sold The uncertain future of physical space for artists is something that could really limit and those deteriorations of affordability and accessibility of space means that artists don't feel secure. And if Baltimore is going to continue, I think, to thrive for creative folk, like making studio space a reality for people, especially emerging artists, is really, really important.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The studio space is really particularly important for me with the work that I have at the BMA. So this is my normal like home studio. I'm in the basement of my house. But for that work, because it was so large and I wanted to be so big, like I had to work in a separate place. So it's ironic that when I came up with the concept for that work, I didn't know where I was going to show it. I didn't know how it was going to done, but I made a decision that I was going to do it. So I was like planning, me and my husband were like, we can move the kitchen table over to the side and we can lay things on the floor. We can move the couch over here. So, I'm kind of like, once I make a decision to do something, like I'm going to get it done. But it just was ironic that maybe like, I would say no less than a week after I had decided I was going to do this work, Leela contacted me and wanted to do a studio visit. And so that was important too, because the thing she asked me was, what's the next big thing for you? What do you see you need? And I was like, I have an idea for this great work that I want to do. And so, the once I made a command to create the work, the way was made for it to happen. But studio space is really important to that process. So I had to rent a separate studio space outside of my home in order to be able to, get that work done.
And can I also say too, if artists desire to be property holders, like the barrier to entry for that can be really intimidating. If like financial literacy, like just understanding how it works and down payments, all that stuff can be really intimidating and such a issue for some of us artists that if anybody's listening and wants to help artists that are interested in that kind of thing, then making those pathways available through, well, there's so many things you can do. Let's talk, reach out and open it to everybody.
I want to just sort of tag on to all of that. Like, I think space is one of the most important things for any artist. Like my work, I wouldn't have been able to make that without my enormous studio space. Like I have a giant space in Highlandtown. It's one of, I think, the last studio complexes that remain affordable in the city, which is a shame. So I think, having more access to that. I do think that in the long term, being able to have your own property, your own space is perhaps like a key thing. So I think, Lauren, your plea to any person who has expertise with that and could sort of provide guidance would be amazing. But I also think that, and I'm incredibly privileged to be able to do this since I do have I'm a full-time faculty member at MICA. And so I have a good income, and so essentially I work in 3 different spaces. So I have like my regular studio space, I have a ceramics studio, and then I also work in a paper making space. And I have access to all of these facilities, which normally would be quite difficult and expensive to have access to. But again, it's so necessary for all the work that I do and this sort of like interdisciplinary play and constant learning that I sort of prioritize in my practice. So I think that, having more of those kind of like opportunities could be really valuable. And frankly, Baltimore actually has quite a few resources. So there's the oh my God, the Baltimore Clayworks, is amazing. And that's its own little community, and then there's the Jewelry Center where I'm taking another class. That's its own little amazing community. There's Pyramid Atlantic where they have paper and printmaking. That's its own little community. So there are all of these like incredibly, vibrant, fertile pockets, where people are doing their thing, and there are fascinating projects and processes happening in those spaces that are somewhat siloed sometimes. So I think it's also like having people flow through those spaces, know what's around, and be able to sort of like share their work and their ideas across those different spheres.
Now, I'd like to, Tracy, I think we got a little carried away, but we were into some really critical issues, and I didn't want to lose the momentum of these valuable comments that were made. So, Tracy, if you have some questions that you can field us from the chat box, we would love to respond.
I've got questions from all over the place. There's been some internal questions from folks that work along with us. One question I thought was really interesting was there's a question about if you there's a few of you that are obviously like teachers or work during the day in some respect, mostly in education. Do you feel like there's a choice between one or the two? So if you could only just work on your work, like be a studio artist, would you choose to go that direction?
Well, I'll answer that. It's my goal ultimately to be able to be in the studio full time. I feel like as an educator, that's just a part of who I am. So I mean, there's going to be always some type of education going on, but that is my goal. I feel like I'm in a really good space right now. Things are kind of taking up with momentum. Yeah, so you know, if it comes to a point where I'm having to too often choose, say, no, I can't do this because of this, then something has to go. Something has to go. So yeah, I would love to be, you know, a 100% studio artist.
Well,
but
I
I
think
also have to think about timing. I think timing is really important. So I'm not like just gonna jump the gun, but like certain things would have to be in place in order for me to step away like from the classroom completely. But yeah, if I love helping students, but I also really love like this work comes out right, you know?
Right.
Well, I think LaToya is like pointing out something that's really important. So like space is really important, but time is really important, and we're all really strapped for time. So I think for me, teaching is incredibly important. Actually, when again, going back to this whole theme of legacy, like I think teaching is actually part of that, you know, because you're working with like young artists, you know, and, you know, providing guidance and mentorship, but it's this reciprocal relationship. So everybody is developing and growing, you know, in a way that probably wouldn't be possible. Like I wouldn't have evolved the way that I've evolved if I didn't have these opportunities to kind of commune with these young people, you know, who are doing amazing and just like unpredictable and unexpected things, like new things. So I think that's like really important. And I don't know if that would ever go away, but I agree with LaToya. Like it would be great to be able to rebalance a little bit, you know, have flexibility instead of be sort of like locked into a really kind of like regimented schedule as you are if you're teaching like full time.
The other question that I have is going back to legacy and your voice as an artist having a place in sort of preserving that legacy. So say 5, 10, 100 years from now, even after you're not here, do you feel that it's important to preserve your voice or the artist's voice in general as a part of that legacy?
I would say yes. Just because you know, that's like the firsthand account of the experience of the work and kind of what the work is about. And so I think a part of that is documentation is really important, whether it's like events, talks like this being recorded or my own personal documentation, catalogs and things of that nature. So I'm a part of a collective called Black Women of Print. So it's basically, you know, it's a group of Black women printmakers, but we were kind of thinking about our foremothers who are also printmakers. And a lot of times it was really hard to find information about people. And so even through being a part of this group, I'm still being introduced to women printmakers who I had never heard of, like at school or at any point. So I feel like you know, that sense of like documentation and preservation of information about an artist's practice and their work is really important.
Can I jump into that for a minute? Because in the time, in my era of training to become an art historian, I really came from a BFA program at Queens College where, you know, I was an artist, but I was pissed because I couldn't find any books on the shelf ever about women, about people of color, about Native Americans. I was just absolutely so frustrated. So when I decided to go and I got an opportunity to go get a grant, the training was always centered around somebody else's voice talking for or about or through the artist's reality, career, experience. And so as I began to write, because I came from a practical studio practice, my art history started to flip into trying to talk to the artists, as many living artists as possible, so I could get a firsthand experience about what it was they were trying to do without the what you call the filters, the filters.
Mm-hmm.
So, now decades and generations of writers have passed, and the literature is full of too many other voices than the artists themselves. And so right now, I, as a writer, and I'm doing my stuff. I'm a shadow warrior artist. I do it, to keep my sanity and keep me balanced. But everything that I'm writing now, I'm working very hard to make sure that I have authenticity and affirmation from the artist's voice. All right? Because too many writers were making up stuff about processes that they didn't know anything about. They had never gotten dirty. If they were in the studio, they were just witnesses to the process, but they had not gone to the physicality of working through problems like that. And so sometimes, even in grad school, I remember listening to people talk about or interpret things, and I go, have you ever held a piece of charcoal? You know, have you ever cut a piece of paper and tried to paste it down? You understand? And make movement. I am very, very much urging everyone to look at what they're doing and to make sure that all of the artists that we find, the letters that they write, the I don't care if they're doodles. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are important to tell us about the experiences of the creative process, which is completely and totally downplayed in our country and in our culture.
Very, very true. Very true, Leslie. I have a there's another question here that I think is a good one too. It's from the animal group. So let's see, wait, do we have a couple? Let me go back. So this is a question. So along the lines of barriers, do you think that there is an issue with the existing practice, the existing pricing and pay for artists' work? Do you think the system and the method of pricing needs to change or not? It's a good one. Or we can break it down.
You know, this business of pricing and the marketplace, I've always said it's so fickle. It's so fickle. And it's so unreliable, because even when an artist sells a piece or a dealer takes a piece of an artist from an artist and puts it up for auction to boost the price, the problem that really disturbs me is that artist never gets any percentage of what that blowout auction price might be. All right.
Mm-hmm.
How the work is priced is usually predicated on first levels. What have you sold before? Okay. Who has purchased your work? So there has to be a whole different system of cultivating collectors. And I know Be More Art has been working on a few initiatives to cultivate collectors, young collectors, to move out, to start collecting art, which helps younger artists establish a price point. All right. But basically, when you get into the business of pricing, and this is not my forte, I just got away from it because it just made me too angry. And I said, you need to stay in your lane, Leslie, But I knew that there were so many things that don't happen for the artist in terms of how they are remunerated for their work. Because people think that, creativity is just like, from the head of Zeus. Something hit, the idea flew out, and you all just slapped it down on a piece of paper. And that's the furthest from the truth. It's like if you're looking at the Olympics right now, all right? And you look at every genre of athletic sport, you have to consider how long everybody trained to get to that point. And not everybody's going to get a medal. But to be an Olympian is amazing. And in our community, we have so many makers, all right? We have an abundance in this region, in the DMV, Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C. I'm not even talking about New York. We have such an abundant community of creatives, but we don't have the collector patronage background to help us build up the price point for our work, so that when we go to the art fairs, Art Freeze or the biennials or whatever, that you are in your work is at a competitive market price. So a lot of work has to be done in that arena.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a hard question to answer about prices, especially if you think about like a student versus a professional artist, or just where the artist currently is in their career. I do feel like you need to do your own type of research and be aware of what's happening in your area, in terms of like, not saying you have to like ask people what all their prices are, but just being aware of what things are going for, what type of work is selling in your area. But I would just say on a other note, like, you have to be confident in the prices that you set. And also, I'm going to say like be realistic, but yeah, just be honest with yourself about what you want to set as the price of the work, but also at the same time being okay if things don't sell right away. And I think that's kind of easy for me to say because like Cindy mentioned, like I do have a full-time salary and a job, but I was okay with stuff not selling for a long time. So a lot of the works that, people are, oh, this is such great work. I had this same work when nobody was buying it. But I think now it's just like people are more exposed to what I've been doing already. So yeah, it was for a long time. I didn't have any collectors in Baltimore except one person. And things, I was just okay with stuff not selling, but I was also, it'll sell eventually. But I think you just have to be aware of like what your personal needs are as an artist, just the kind of route that you want to take and how your pricing reflects that.
I think we have time for another question. This is a really interesting question that came up around the idea of collecting and collectors. There's Antoinette Peel asked, as artists, are they concerned about collectors and collecting today in the era of the NFTs? As mentioned above, collecting looks different now in that context. Have any of you explored NFTs? Any thoughts about it?
I honestly don't know enough about it to, say, I don't know, to give a concrete answer. I know I'm about physical things. I am an analog girl in the digital world. I like the physical handle. I read physical books. I don't read either. So I like having the physical, tangible object. So that's not something that I have personally been like excited to explore. Although I feel like it's something that I do need to know about and research a little bit more when I have like more time, like more free time. So I feel like you should be aware of what's happening, even though I may not particularly engage in it, just to be educated about it and be aware. I think it's important.
So, I mean, I think that Lauren and I have talked a little bit about kind of like our work in this context. And because I think both of us make slightly different work, with the scale that the installation aspect of our work makes it's just a different conversation. Like, what does collecting that kind of thing look like? So I think I don't have any answer for that. Like, I think it gets complicated. And I don't think, Lauren, we really came up with a satisfactory kind of like, stopping point with that conversation. But I think that, the NFT thing is kind of interesting. I tried to find out more about it. Like I've read like maybe 5 or 6 articles, and I still don't really understand what an NFT is, or what you're getting when you buy an NFT. And like, I have a naturally suspicious nature. And so I'm just kind of like, I'm a little, I don't know, LaToya, I'm kind of with you. I'm not sure about the NFTs. I think it not quite sure like where that's going. And then the one thing that I do know about it is its environmental impact. And I think like you do have to kind of think about that today, and maybe there's an evolution of the technology where that becomes less of an issue. But I do think that that needs to be part of the dialogue in our day and age, is like, what is the impact of your work on the environment? Not just the kind of like intellectual or social environment, but also on the environment, so I think maybe that's part of the conversation too.
I don't know where Tracy went, but here we are, the 5 of us, and we can continue as I'm moving because I'm losing juice on my equipment, so I'm looking for so I don't black out on everyone. But you make a good point, because I know that my son was worrying me about NFTs, and I'm like, I am having enough problems just dealing with, like LaToya, analog stuff and the physicality. I like to see the actual dollar. This is something that, yes, we need to know about, and we need to know about it so that we can safeguard our creative work. All right, and we know what the possibilities are in terms of what our options are. So I'm like, okay, I'm super cautious. I'm hypersensitive about that. And I'm not ready to yet jump into it because I don't know where it's going. And I don't know what kind of level of security or sustainability. It's very sexy right now. Okay, it's very sexy because it's very techy, and there are supposedly numerous opportunities to become wealthy and financially secure, or so they say. And I know that globally, this market of NFT is growing in Europe and certainly across Africa. But I still don't have enough that give me the security to know that this is something that I could dabble in now. And I know that, I have never been able to afford to buy art. I have a little bit of it because I often trade off, or I get gifts, or when writers, when artists need something written and they don't have money, and they say, well, I have a print. And I said, done. I will gladly take a piece of art, even if it's a AP. I don't have a problem with that. So I want to make sure that there is a security available within our market, because it's still very fragile to us. How are we doing, Tracy?
Well, we're a tad over, but considering that my whole signal dropped, I have
That's
a
all
feeling
right. I
that
was trying to catch mine before it went out too.
Thank you, all of you, for just a really, I appreciate this conversation. It's a very, very candid, a very honest conversation. I think we've actually we've hit a couple of points that I think a lot of people here in Baltimore and other artists, even just in our area, can definitely relate to. And it also kind of makes us think a little bit deeper about some of the programming that we're doing at the BMA, and like how we can offer some of that support. We are about 4 minutes over now. Things do happen. So I'm gonna close this out. I hope I'm not cutting you guys off a little bit too raw here. But I want to thank each of you for joining us this evening. And I want to thank everybody who is watching and those who are going to watch on the replay. Thank you so much. And just as a reminder that the All Due Respect exhibition is open until April 3rd of 2022. So please make your way to the Baltimore Museum of Art to see this exhibition. The exhibition is free to see. You just have to sign up for time tickets. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. Have a good night, those who are watching.
Good night. Thank you, all my artists. I love you. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.